Imagine you are standing in a valley at dawn. Behind you, 20,000 men. Soldiers who were slaves. Warriors who built an empire from chains. In front of you, the army that just burned Baghdad to ash. That turned the greatest library on earth into a river of black ink. That killed over 1 million people and didn't lose a single night's sleep. They have never been permanently defeated. Not once. Not in 50 years. And right now, they're riding straight toward you. Most men would pray. Baybars sharpened his sword, because Baybars had a secret, and that secret wasn't numbers. It wasn't superior weapons. It wasn't even courage. It was the ground beneath his feet. This is the story of Ain Jalut, the battle you've never heard of, that decided the fate of the entire world. Before we go any further, if you love stories where intelligence defeats brute force, where geography itself becomes a weapon, where underdogs rewrite history, hit that like button right now, and subscribe, because what I'm about to show you will completely change how you see the medieval world. Let's go. The year is 1258. Baghdad is the center of civilization. Not just Islamic civilization, human civilization, 500 years old. Home to the House of Wisdom. A library so vast, so magnificent, it made every other place of learning on earth look like a village schoolhouse. Mathematicians, astronomers, physicians, philosophers. From Spain to India, they all came here. The Caliph al-Mustasim sits on his golden throne, convinced of one thing above all others. God will protect this city. He is catastrophically wrong. In February 1258, Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis himself, arrives at Baghdad's walls with over 100,000 men. The Caliph sends envoys. He negotiates. He stalls. None of it matters. When Baghdad falls, the Mongols don't just conquer it. They erase it. For 7 straight days, they systematically destroy everything. Scholars are hunted down and executed. Scientists, poets, doctors, artists, all dead. They throw so many books into the Tigris River that eyewitnesses say the water ran black with ink for days. Centuries of accumulated human knowledge, gone, vanished in a week. And the Caliph himself? He is wrapped in a carpet and trampled to death by horses. Because Mongol superstition says you cannot spill royal blood directly on the ground. They couldn't even give him the dignity of a clean death. But here's what you need to understand. This wasn't a tragedy unique to Baghdad. This was Tuesday for the Mongol war machine. From 1206, when Genghis Khan united the Mongol tribes under one blood-soaked banner, to 1258, in just over 50 years, the Mongols had conquered the largest contiguous land empire in human history. The Jin dynasty of China, crushed. The Khwarezmian Empire of Central Asia, obliterated. Russia, shattered like glass. Poland and Hungary, terrorized into submission. Every kingdom, every army, every general who stood against them, gone. But how? How did a nomadic people from the Mongolian steppe, with no cities, no universities, no massive industrial base, defeat literally everyone? 2 words. Their horses. Now I know what you're thinking. Everyone had horses in the medieval world. But the Mongol relationship with horses was something else entirely. A Mongol warrior didn't just ride a horse. He was born on one. From the age of 3, Mongol boys were placed on horseback. By adolescence, a Mongol warrior could fire a bow with deadly accuracy, not just while riding, but while riding at full gallop, firing backward over his shoulder. The Persian historian Juvayni wrote that Mongol riders appeared to be a single creature, like the centaurs of Greek mythology. One body, 4 legs, unstoppable. But here is the true genius, the detail that explains everything. Every Mongol warrior brought 3 to 5 horses on campaign. While a European knight exhausted a single horse, the Mongol kept switching to fresh mounts. 60 miles in a single day, twice what any other medieval army could manage. They could appear where they were thought to be impossible, strike with devastating force, and vanish before reinforcements arrived. The Mongol horse itself was perfectly built for this life. Small and stocky, only about 4.5 feet tall, not beautiful, not glamorous, but indestructible. These ponies could survive on almost nothing. They endured summer heat and Siberian winters 40 degrees below zero, and when food was truly scarce, a Mongol warrior would make a small cut in his horse's neck, drink some blood for nourishment, seal the wound, and keep riding. No supply wagons, no baggage trains, no vulnerable logistics to protect. A European army had to follow roads, had to stay near cities for food. Moved slowly and predictably, the Mongols could cross deserts, traverse mountain ranges, appear in places where no army was supposed to exist. They were medieval air cavalry, self-sufficient, hypermobile, and capable of striking anywhere, anytime. Their battlefield tactics were just as revolutionary. The Mongol army was organized with mathematical precision, units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 warriors. This decimal system allowed for complex coordinated maneuvers that feudal armies simply couldn't replicate. A typical Mongol battle looked like this. Light cavalry harasses the enemy from distance, a constant storm of arrows, always just out of reach. The enemy charges to engage, and then the Mongols run. They turn and flee. To the enemy, it looks like a rout. They break formation and give chase, horses stretched out, men spread thin, far from any support. That's when the trap closes. The fleeing Mongols wheel around, firing backward with the Parthian shot, arrows at full gallop, facing completely the wrong direction. Meanwhile, heavy cavalry, hidden nearby, crashes into the enemy's exposed flanks from two sides simultaneously. Devastating. And it worked against everyone. At the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223, the Mongols led Russian princes on a 9-day chase across the steppe. By the time the trap closed, the Russian horses were exhausted. Of the 80,000 Russians who started that battle, only a handful survived. And beyond tactics, there was psychology. Cities that surrendered immediately might be spared. Cities that resisted were obliterated. Every man, every woman, every child, every building burned, every field salted. The message was simple. Resistance is not brave. Resistance is suicide. By 1260, this strategy had worked for over 50 years. After Baghdad, the Mongols turned west into Syria. Damascus, one of the oldest cities on earth, opened its gates without a fight. Christian kingdoms submitted and sent auxiliary troops. The Mongols now controlled everything from Korea to the Mediterranean Sea. Only one major power remained: Egypt. To understand why Egypt chose to fight when everyone else submitted, you need to understand one of the strangest institutions in the medieval world. The word Mamluk means owned in Arabic. The Mamluks were enslaved boys, typically captured from Turkic tribes of Central Asia or the Caucasus, purchased by Muslim rulers and brought to Egypt. Boys between 8 and 12 years old. What happened to them next sounds almost impossible. They were enrolled in military academies. For years, sometimes decades, they trained in horseback riding, archery, swordsmanship, wrestling. They learned to fire arrows with deadly accuracy at full gallop. They studied tactics and strategy. They formed bonds of brotherhood that lasted their entire lives. And despite being technically enslaved, the most talented Mamluks could rise to become generals, governors, sultans. In 1250, they had overthrown their own masters and seized power in Egypt. The slaves had become kings. In 1260, the Mamluk Sultan was a man named Qutuz, born a prince in Central Asia. When the Mongols destroyed his homeland, he was sold into slavery. He worked his way up through sheer competence and ruthlessness, eventually seizing power in Egypt in 1259. So when Hulagu's envoys arrived in Cairo carrying a letter demanding Egypt's surrender, this wasn't just politics for Qutuz, this was personal. Hulagu's letter read, in part, "Our horses are swift, our arrows sharp, our swords like thunderbolts, our soldiers as numerous as the sand. Fortresses will not detain us. Your prayers to God will not avail against us. Submit, or face total destruction." Qutuz read this aloud to his council. The room went quiet. Some advisors urged surrender. After all, hadn't every kingdom that resisted been destroyed? Wasn't submission the only logical choice? Qutuz's answer was swift and absolute. He had the Mongol envoys executed. Their heads were mounted on the gates of Cairo for all to see. No submission, no negotiation, no compromise. To most observers, this looked like madness. But Qutuz knew something his advisors didn't fully appreciate. The Mongols were not at full strength. In 1259, the great Khan Monka had died while campaigning in China. Mongol law required all royal princes to return to Karakorum to elect his successor. Hulagu had departed Syria in late 1259, taking over 100,000 men with him. He left behind only a rear guard under his general Kitbuka, estimated at somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 cavalry, still formidable, still battle-hardened veterans, but a fraction of the full Mongol force. Qutuz saw his window. He assembled 20,000 Mamluk cavalry, and then did something that would have seemed completely unthinkable just months earlier. He negotiated with the Crusaders. Think about that for a moment. The Mamluks and the Crusaders had been mortal enemies for decades. They had fought countless battles over the Holy Land. But the Crusaders of Acre had made a cold calculation. The Mongols had already sacked the Crusader city of Sidon. If Egypt fell, they would be next. Better to let the Mamluks pass through their territory than face the Mongol horde alone. So in July 1260, the Mamluk army marched north, through the territory of their traditional enemies, completely unmolested. One of the strangest alliances in medieval history, born of pure survival instinct. And here, a second figure steps into our story. A Mamluk general named Baybars, born Turkic, sold into slavery as a boy, rose through the Mamluk ranks to become one of their finest commanders, brilliant, ruthless, and burning with ambition. But here is the detail that matters most for what comes next. Years earlier, when Baybars had fallen out of favor with the previous sultan, he had fled Egypt and spent time wandering through Syria and Palestine as a fugitive. He had walked these hills, camped in these valleys, studied every rocky path, every hidden spring, every narrow pass where cavalry could move and where they could not. He knew exactly where to hide an army. Now, before I tell you about the battle itself, I need to tell you about something that sounds almost laughably mundane. Horseshoes. I know. You came here for epic cavalry charges, not a lecture on medieval farrier technology. But stay with me, because this is the key to everything. The Mongol horse had evolved on the soft grasslands of Mongolia, hard, durable hooves, perfectly shaped for that terrain. On the steppe, they didn't need iron shoes. But Palestine is not the Mongolian steppe. The Levant is rocky limestone, sharp outcroppings, hard-packed ground. When unshod horses traverse this terrain repeatedly, their hooves crack, chip, and bruise. They move slower, tire faster. In severe cases, they go completely lame. The Mamluks, who had fought in this region for generations, shod their horses with iron. On the rocky ground of northern Palestine, Mamluk horses could move faster, fight longer, and maneuver more effectively than Mongol ponies. And there was a second problem, even more fundamental: grass. Every Mongol warrior had 3 to 5 horses. Each horse needed roughly 9 pounds of grass every single day. If Kitbuka had 15,000 cavalry with 3 horses each, that's 45,000 horses, requiring over 400,000 pounds of fodder daily. On the Mongolian steppe, no problem. Endless grass in every direction, semi-arid Syria, critical shortage. The entire Syrian landscape could support roughly 80,000 horses before overgrazing became a crisis, and historical records suggest the Mamluks had deliberately burned grassland in certain areas, denying fodder to Mongol horses before the campaign even began. Medieval resource denial warfare, brutally effective. This was the ground Baybars stood on. This was the secret. Now let's talk about the battlefield itself. The Jezreel Valley, a triangular plain in northern Palestine, stretching roughly 30 miles from Mount Carmel in the west to the Jordan River Valley in the east. Fertile land, a natural invasion corridor, the kind of place armies have marched through for 10,000 years. The valley floor is flat and open. Perfect cavalry country. Exactly the kind of terrain the Mongols dominated. But it is surrounded on all sides by hills. Mount Gilboa rises to the south. The hills of Lower Galilee bound it to the north. Mount Tabor looms to the northeast. And these hills are thick with trees and rocky outcroppings. Near the valley's narrowest point sits a spring, Ain Jalut, Goliath's spring, where legend said young David had defeated the giant thousands of years before. The ground itself carried the memory of impossible victories. Baybars looked at this valley and saw exactly what he needed. The flat floor would draw the Mongols in. It was irresistible cavalry ground. The surrounding hills could hide an entire army. If the Mamluks could lure the Mongols deep into the valley, then spring from 3 sides simultaneously, they could force them to fight uphill on rocky ground, with tired horses on cracked hooves. It was the Mongols' own signature tactic. The feigned retreat and the ambush turned back on its inventors. On the night of September 2nd, 1260, Qutuz moved his main force into the hills. Thousands of cavalry hidden among trees and rocks. Complete silence. Waiting. Baybars took a smaller vanguard, perhaps 2,000 to 3,000 cavalry, into the valley itself. Bait. When the Mongols appeared, Baybars would engage them, provoke them, sting them, and then retreat, drawing them deeper into the valley, drawing them into the jaws of the trap. As the sun set on September 2nd, Baybars sat on his horse in the darkness, listening to thousands of Mamluk soldiers find their hiding places in the hills around him. Tomorrow, he would ride out into that valley with a handful of men and wait for an army that had never been stopped. What do you imagine goes through a man's mind in a moment like that? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know. September 3rd, 1260. Dawn. Kitbuka's army approaches from the north, supremely confident, battle-hardened veterans who have never been permanently defeated. But Baybars has positioned his men carefully. The Mongols advance from the north, which means they ride into the valley facing east, into the rising sun. A small detail, but in the chaos of battle, small details compound into decisive advantages. The battle opens with Baybars doing exactly what Kitbuka expects, charging forward to meet the Mongol advance. Arrows fill the air from both sides. Men and horses scream. The thunder of hooves shakes the ground. But Baybars is not trying to win this first engagement. He is trying to enrage the Mongols. His cavalry darts in, looses arrows, wheels away before the Mongols can close, charges back, stings again, retreats again. For hours this continues. The Mongols, used to enemies who either broke immediately or died fighting, find it maddening. They push harder, send more cavalry forward. Baybars fights desperately. His men are being pushed back. The situation is genuinely dangerous. And then, Baybars gives the signal, retreat. His cavalry turns and flees back down the valley. To Kitbuka, it looks exactly like what he expected. The Mamluks are breaking. He orders the pursuit. Thousands of Mongol hooves thunder on the valley floor. Blood is up. Victory feels close. The valley narrows as they drive deeper, the hills closing in from both sides. On the hillside above, Qutuz watches the Mongol army pour into the valley like water filling a bottle. Now, the hills erupt. From three sides simultaneously, Mamluk cavalry pours out of the trees and rock. War drums thunder. Battle cries in Arabic echo off the valley walls. The Mongol army, stretched out in a long pursuit formation, suddenly finds itself surrounded. The Mongols don't panic. These are professionals. They begin forming a defensive circle, trying to fight their way out, but they are fighting uphill, and the rocky ground that has been slowly cracking their horses' unshod hooves now becomes catastrophic. Horses stumble on loose rocks, slip on uneven terrain. Their damaged hooves make them slower, less responsive, less controllable. Meanwhile, Mamluk horses, their iron shoes gripping the limestone, charge down the rocky slopes without hesitation, and then the Mamluks deploy something the Mongols have never faced before. Hand cannons, called midfa in Arabic, crude metal tubes packed with gunpowder. Not particularly accurate. Didn't kill many Mongols directly, but that was never the point. When the midfa fired, the explosion terrified the horses. These animals had been trained to stay calm through screaming and steel and blood, but they had never heard anything like gunpowder. Horses reared, bucked, bolted. Riders were thrown, formations shattered. Into that chaos, Mamluk heavy cavalry crashed like a wall of iron. The battle raged for hours. The Mongols fought with breathtaking ferocity. They managed to break through the Mamluk left flank, pushing the Egyptian forces back, threatening to split the entire Mamluk army in two. This was the critical moment. If the Mongols escaped the trap, the whole plan collapsed. Qutuz saw the danger, and he made a decision that separated good generals from great ones. He removed his helmet. In medieval warfare, generals wore distinctive armor so their troops could identify them in battle. By removing his helmet, Qutuz was making himself recognizable to every single soldier on the field. He was also making himself a target. Then he rode directly into the gap where the Mongols were breaking through. His bodyguards grabbed at his reins. He spurred past them. As he rode, he shouted across the battlefield, "O soldiers of Islam, O defenders of the faith." The effect was electric. Seeing their sultan, bareheaded, vulnerable, charging into the most dangerous point of the battle, the wavering left flank held. Fresh troops poured into the gap. The Mongol breakthrough stalled, then reversed. And then something happened that Kitbuka had always feared. The Syrian auxiliaries in his own army defected. Men who had only fought for the Mongols because resistance had seemed hopeless. Now, seeing Mongol cavalry pushed back for the first time in their lives, they turned their weapons on their Mongol overlords. The Mongol army began to collapse from within. Kitbuka's horse was shot from under him. He fell to the ground, and Mamluk soldiers surrounded him immediately. According to the historian Rashid al-Din, when the captured Kitbuka was brought before Qutuz, the general replied without flinching, "If I am killed by your hand, I consider it God's act, not yours. Be not deceived by this event. For when news of my death reaches Hulagu Khan, the earth will quake with Mongol hooves, from Azerbaijan to the gates of Egypt, a threat and a prophecy, delivered by a man facing death." Then they beheaded him on the battlefield. With their general dead, the Mongol army broke entirely. Those who could flee, fled, racing back north, across rocky terrain on horses with cracked, bruised hooves, pursued relentlessly by fresh Mamluk cavalry on iron-shod horses. It was a slaughter. By the end of September 3rd, 1260, the army that had destroyed Baghdad, burned the greatest library on Earth and driven civilization to the edge of extinction, had been destroyed in a rocky valley in northern Palestine. For the first time in over 50 years, a Mongol army had been decisively defeated in open battle, and they would never cross that line again. The news spread like wildfire. In Cairo, people celebrated in the streets, in the ruins of Baghdad, in Damascus, in Aleppo. Everywhere the same whisper, maybe they're not invincible after all. Qutuz sent Kitbuka's head back to Cairo on a spear, mounted on the same gate where the Mongol envoys' heads had been displayed months earlier. The symbolism was unmistakable. The Mamluks retook Damascus within days, Aleppo within a month. Syria returned to Muslim hands. Hulagu Khan, furious, exactly as Kitbuka had predicted, began planning a massive invasion to avenge the defeat. He never executed it. His rival Burqa Khan, ruler of the Golden Horde and a convert to Islam, was horrified by the destruction of Baghdad and declared war on Hulagu. Mongol against Mongol, civil war within the empire. Hulagu spent the rest of his life fighting on his northern border. He died in 1265 with Egypt unconquered. His successors tried, failed. By 1303, after another decisive defeat at Marj el-Safar, the Mongols abandoned their western ambitions forever. Ain Jalut had marked the permanent western limit of Mongol expansion. Now, let's ask the question historians have argued about for over 750 years. What if the Mongols had won? With Egypt under Mongol control, they would have had a base to invade North Africa. They had already reached Poland in the north. A Mongol empire stretching from Poland to Morocco, holding Europe in a geographic pincer from two directions simultaneously. Would the Italian Renaissance have occurred? Would the Age of Exploration have happened? Would Islam have survived as one of the world's great faiths if its last major power center had been destroyed? We cannot know for certain, but we know this. The world we live in today was shaped by what happened in a rocky valley in northern Palestine on one September morning. Because a general knew where to hide an army. Because horses had iron shoes. Because Syria didn't have enough grass. Sometimes the difference between two entirely different worlds is measured in horseshoes. And now, the part of the story that history rarely tells cleanly. On the march back to Cairo, flush with the greatest victory of their generation, Qutuz had promised Baybars that he would be rewarded with Syria as his own domain. Whether Qutuz changed his mind, or simply asked Baybars to wait, we don't know exactly what was said between them. What we know is what happened next. On October 24th, 1260, less than 2 months after Ain Jalut, Baybars and a group of conspirators murdered Qutuz during a hunting expedition. Then Baybars declared himself Sultan of Egypt. He went on to become one of the greatest rulers in Mamluk history, expelling the Crusaders from the Holy Land, defeating subsequent Mongol invasions, building an empire that would dominate the Middle East for generations. But think about what that means for Qutuz, a man enslaved by the Mongols, who rose to lead Egypt, who made the brave call to fight rather than surrender, who rode bareheaded into the most dangerous moment of the battle, who saved Islamic civilization in the Middle East and North Africa. He was murdered by his own general within 2 months of his greatest triumph. History is messy like that. It doesn't give us the clean, morally satisfying endings we